Particularly in Western games, discussion about open worlds as a gameplay experience and design idea is important, due to the prominence of open worlds in mainstream titles. They're all over the place, from the Red Dead Redemption games, Marvel's Spider-Man, the Grand Theft Auto series, post-Grand Theft Auto 3, the list goes on. Particularly in Western games, open world games have been popular, and it's understandable to see why. For the developers, open worlds can communicate a sense of vision, a sense of power in the scale of the game made. For players, a great feeling of freedom and also of curiosity. There's a great world ahead. What lies in it? Explore it all at your own pace, or don't explore it at all, but either way, the choice and pace of such actions are up to you. But there's a difference in execution on the meaning of open worlds in different titles. And while what the definition of fun is for people can differ depending on taste, it doesn't mean that utilization of open worlds isn't bound by a set of rules that influence whether or not players will be more likely to maximize the fun they have playing a game, or whether or not an open world environment is appropriate for the type of game being played. Take Marvel's Spider-Man, for example. It's an open world action game taking place in a fictionalized but essentially true to the real thing depiction of New York City. What we have here is, similar to New York City itself, is a city that's incredibly busy, full of buildings and people and vehicles and populated to an amazing extent. Contrast this to something like Red Dead Redemption 2. It's obvious, but we have to remember that the context of and type of game that Red Dead Redemption 2 is all about is much different than Marvel's Spider-Man. Red Dead Redemption 2 takes place in the twilight of the age of the Wild West, with vagabonds and outlaws on their way out as civilization becomes more sophisticated and developed, and the reach of the police force reaches completion as they eliminate the lawless vagrants of the age to effectively crush the spirit of the lifestyle. So here we have a world that is empty, so to speak, or at least in comparison, but still not poorly executed. The purpose of Red Dead Redemption games is to capture a sense of freedom that these vagrants have, or are trying to latch onto for dear life, as it is a path that they've chosen and find themselves stuck on for varying personal and life circumstance reasons. And you can spend time wandering a great wilderness in Red Dead Redemption 2, and it might superficially seem empty, but that misses so much of what the developers are going for. In embracing this lifestyle, are the outlaws closer to nature and the environment around them than those civilized folk are? Those within the confines or boundaries of the law also tend to stay within the boundary lines of maps and town borders. Meanwhile, outside of those lines are plenty of trees, all sorts of wildlife, and vast landscapes. Others you might see include fellow outlaws and characters, some of whom are in trouble with the law and seeking escape, some of whom hide out in trees, some of whom have elected for a solitary life in a cabin. Contrast that to something like No Man's Sky, for example. What the developers were going for here is very interesting. Procedurally generated worlds, traveling through space, planets with land formations and skies, different inhabitants. The main idea of No Man's Sky is to impress upon players a feeling of immense scale, such that it is meant to induce a great deal of wonder, inspiring them to venture throughout space continually, but also to mind the places that they've already discovered, and to manage the resources that they're working with, not to mention the quests they take on. But the worlds discovered can be seen as repetitive, outside of superficial factors. Differences in color for the planets or resources and civilization on planets is generally sparse, and the game itself is built in part upon the process of discovery itself. That the worlds can feel monotonous doesn't help to make the discovery of planets feel not monotonous. All the planets share essential characteristics which may not be enough for all to deter a feeling of boredom. Additionally, we can take a look at Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain for an example of a game with an open world routinely criticized for being too empty. To begin with, the idea of an open world Metal Gear Solid game is also quite strange, because the Metal Gear Solid series has been about stealth gameplay, and yet for The Phantom Pain we routinely see criticisms about the empty open world, and the sense of monotony that accompanies players as they navigate the game. Emphasizing a great deal of scale in the world you navigate would necessarily contrast with that goal of stealth-based missions. Of course, you can still make games that involve using your environment to avoid enemies or to properly approach an objective in an open-world game, but that doesn't mean that open worlds facilitate that type of gameplay most effectively. When we play a game with an open world in it, we as the game player want to have purpose. It has to feel deliberate on the part of the designers. There must be harmony with the game's concept and the environment that our avatar navigates. It's easy to like open world games that are full of people and busyness, but even games that don't feature as much activity are fine too. A poorly executed open world, on the other hand, feels boring, dull, and lifeless. It can be full of people or some sense of civilization, but it will be too uninteresting to grab our attention as the player. We want also to avoid a sense of blandness, sameness, or uniformity, as it prevents us as a player from more deeply engaging in games. And such a mission is something that developers in particular will want to task themselves with avoiding. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Name some examples of open world games that felt boring to you. And why was that the case? Do you think that open worlds in games are seen too often? Do you find yourself tired of the open world concept appearing in games? What do you think of the more linearly constructed or smaller worlds that you might see in some Japanese games, such as some Japanese RPG franchises as seen in Atelier or Tales games? Would you make the argument that open worlds are preferred in different countries or regions? If you had to choose between games that are or are not open world, for the sake of argument, which seems preferable to you, or which seems easier to make games for? As news of an apparent Grand Theft Auto 6 release have broken recently, this is a discussion that merits keeping an eye on. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.